Next, from Peoria, we talk one-on-one with Congressman Aaron Schock, who sits on the powerful Ways and Means Committee, which writes the U.S. tax code. We hear about the rising cost of entitlement spending and learn what changes may be coming in tax deductions if the Republicans were to win the White House. This runs about 35 minutes.
Congressman Aaron Schock, thank you for joining us again on the Illinois Channel.
Good to be with you, Terry. Thanks for being here.
We haven't had a chance to do a formal sit-down meeting for a while, and we appreciate you taking the time during this August recess. First of all, let me just open up with a broad general question. As you sit here today, what are some of the issues that you're really focusing on as you're back here in the district?
Well, obviously, it's always good to be home so that I can hear from my constituents. I'm a big believer with 161 towns in my district, about 700,000 constituents. One of the challenges as a member of Congress going to Washington, D.C. every week, even when I come home on the weekends, it's hard to get around to those 161 towns. So August is really the month where, as an elected representative, I can spend the time I need to get out and see the drought in person, to hear from the small business guy in the rural parts of my district. If you're going to represent a large community like the 18th Congressional District, you got to know the people you're representing, and that takes time. And so I'm grateful for this August recess, really, to be able to spend quality time with my constituents. The issues they're focused on, obviously, on a very macro level, is the economy. They're worried about keeping their job if they got one. They're worried about finding one if they don't. If they're a small business person, they're wondering whether or not they should invest, hire more people, build more plants and equipment. And so economic concerns are the #1 issue, I think, facing our country. And so as a policymaker, I see my job in Washington, D.C., how do you create an environment of certainty so business people feel safe in making investments so that people can go back to work and our economy can continue to grow. The Ways and Means Committee that I serve on is an excellent spot for me to be able to make a difference. Tax reform is something we've worked on for the last year with Democrats and Republicans on the committee. We had 23 different hearings, bringing in different experts, talking about how we can simplify the tax code, not having to raise taxes, but actually lower the rates, but get rid of a lot of the deductions and loopholes in there. We can take the top rate of 35% all the way down to 25%. Get rid of 6 different brackets.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. When you say the 35 to 25, you're talking about the corporate rate?
For individuals and corporate.
Okay.
Taking the top rate for individuals and corporations from 35 down to 25. The reason you have to do it for corporations and individuals is because most companies in America are not C corporations. They're not big companies. They're actually small companies, and they pay the tax as individual income. So you've got to, there's been a lot of focus, you're right, on corporate tax because the United States of America right now has the highest corporate tax rate in the world. And so if you're a Caterpillar or an ADM or a Boeing or a Motorola here in Illinois, that makes it that much more uncompetitive in addition to our state tax here in Illinois. And it's why Aon went to the UK. It's why Abbott is building facilities in Wisconsin. We got to make sure Illinois and the U.S. are competitive on a tax environment. The second major issue, in addition to tax reform, is entitlement reform. We've got to fix Social Security and Medicare. Why? Because all of the actuaries and the trustees of Social Security and Medicare say those programs are going broke. And if you don't deal with Medicare and Social Security, you can't deal with the debt. And the debt is the major driver of uncertainty in our country. Why? Because every dollar of borrowed money is really a deferred tax on future generations. I mean, every dollar that we borrow today is going to have to be paid back by someone in the form of taxes. And so for a business person or an entrepreneur or even just a hardworking taxpayer, they see the federal government's inability to deal with the debt as really a bill that's getting racked up that they're eventually going to have to pay for, their kids and grandkids are eventually going to have to pay for. So dealing with that debt, fixing Social Security and Medicare will help us create that certainty we need in our economy so people feel safe to invest and hire. So tax reform, entitlement reform are really the major policy issues that I'm trying to work on in Washington, D.C. based on what I'm hearing back home, which is economic concerns are job #1.
You know, we sometimes talk to congressmen as if they're omnipotent and they can answer any question, anything. And, you know, you're one of 450 members of the House of Representatives. And, you know, so
Well, let me stop you right there. I'm not omnipotent. I don't have an answer to every question. In fact, oftentimes the question I get, Terry, is, well, you're so young. I'm the youngest member of Congress. How do you do your job? How do you have the life experience you need to answer all these questions? I don't. And I quite frankly would tell you, most of my colleagues don't. And the ones who get into trouble are the ones who think they do. And so the way I can do my
Which
job...
is critical. It's to come home in August and to hear what are the actual issues where the rubber meets the road, which is right here at Bob and Sally's little business.
And when I have to vote on an ag bill, to be able to meet with the farmers who are experts in their field. When I have to vote on an education bill, to go meet with the school teachers and the school administrators who are experts in their field. If I'm having problems, if I got to vote on banking regulation, go meet with the lenders in my district and find out how that's going to impact them. To be a good representative, really, you got to be a good listener. You got to exercise good judgment.
The thing is, you were saying you're working on these issues and you've been talking. The perception among so many people, I think, is that politics, that we're not working together and that we're all just spinning our wheels and nothing ever gets done until we careen off the road into one crisis and then go back into another crisis. We had the debt limit debate last year. We put a poison pill in allegedly to force members to come to terms. Otherwise, we're going to do draconian cuts to defense and Medicare. And yet they didn't come to terms. And now we're going to be facing what we call the fiscal cliff come January, the cuts in Pentagon spending, the cuts in Medicare spending, and also the end of the the current tax rates, often referred to as the Bush tax cuts, that have been in place. So that would effectively mean a tax increase come January. Is that the reality, that there isn't any cooperation, or do you see behind the scenes when you are meeting with your Democratic fellow congresspeople that there actually is more goodwill than what meets the eye to those of us watching from afar?
Well, two things. One, the media likes to have a story, and so the media likes to focus on division. They like to focus on divisive comments that members of Congress make, any kind of fractions within Republicans and Democrats in the White House. So I think to the degree there is disagreement, it's definitely played up, and I think that's unfortunate. The other thing I would say is there's much more agreement among the Congress than there is between the Congress and the White House. And so I'd honestly say that if you looked at what Congress has done over the last 2 or 3 years, we've actually gotten quite a bit done. We passed a multi-year transportation bill with a Republican House and a Democrat Senate. It was the result of the House's proposal and the Senate's proposal being married together. The White House was really absent. The White House had no highway bill proposal. The White House was not involved in the negotiations between the House and the Senate version of the highway bill. So the highway bill that we passed and now have was really a result of Republicans and Democrats in Congress working together. Same thing with the debt limit deal. It was a fiasco. It was waited till the end of the hour, if you will, but at the end of the day we got a deal, and for the first time in our country's history raised the debt limit, but also got $2 trillion in offsetting cuts, something that had not happened before in our country's history. So again, required negotiation between Republicans and Democrats. We did trade agreements, something that's very controversial, difficult to do, with 3 big countries, Panama, Colombia, and the one the president negotiated himself, South Korea. Again, Democrats and Republicans in the Congress had to work together to make that stuff happen, which is huge for manufacturing in Illinois and Illinois' agriculture, new customers in those markets. So obviously I would like to have been more successful than we've been. Obviously there's a lot of things I'd like to see us do that we have not done. But I think it's unfair to say that Congress has been do nothing or gotten nothing done in the last couple of years, because quite frankly that's just not true. But what we have been able to get done has been a function of the House and the Senate working together more so than the White House. And my hope is that whether President Obama is reelected, or obviously my hope is Mitt Romney is elected, that in either case, who's ever in that White House come January has a much more participatory tone and wanting to be involved with negotiating on tax reform, wanting to bring forward ideas on entitlement reforms. The only solutions we've got on tax reform right now is coming out of Congress. The only solution we have coming out for Medicare and Social Security reform is the House Republicans' version of a reform package. We don't have anything from the president on how to fix those programs. So at some point, we need an alternative proposal if we're going to negotiate to a compromise and get something done.
There's so many big issues here. I'm only pausing to try to how to move this along quickly and still address them. On entitlements, this has been a brewing crisis for decades. We've known it's coming, and yet here we are, where it's about to explode. And I don't know that people get enough coverage through the media of this. I don't know that people, and I guess I'm going to ask you, to what extent do you feel when you talk to your constituents, do they get it? Do they understand that this time is different because we are so near what many acknowledge will be a collapse of the existing system if it's not addressed in short order? So here we are in a presidential election, as you just noted. President Obama has not put out any plan to address the brewing entitlement crisis. Is it hard for you? And I kind of think of you, as we said earlier, you can't be an expert on everything, but I think you've always been very good on economic issues. How hard is it for you to express to the constituency just how critical this issue is at this time?
Well, there's no issue facing our country that's more important for two reasons. One, there are a lot of people who are on these programs, Social Security and Medicare, that if they were to go away or they were going to be cut, it'd be devastating for those Americans. And the current law of the land, if Congress does nothing, the current law of the land with Medicare and Social Security is there is an immediate cut to current beneficiaries when the assets are depleted and the programs are in essence bankrupt. For example, on Social Security, the trustees have reported that when the account runs dry in 2030, 2033 to be exact, in 2033 there will be an immediate 20% cut to every senior citizen who's on Social Security in 2033. Now, it's 2012. It's almost 2013 in a few months. That's 20 years from now. If you're getting ready to retire and you're in decent health, you're probably going to be around in 20 years. Certainly if you're in your 50s, life expectancy would suggest you'll be here in your 70s. That means that your planning for retirement means you're going to have an immediate cut if Congress doesn't do something. So there's a real problem for people in a personal sense that they're not going to have what they had been told they were going to have. The United States government is not going to make good on their promise. The longer term problem for us is it's a huge unfunded liability. In other words, for people of my generation or generations yet to come in America, we got to figure out a way that we're going to be able to pay for this. And the way the system was set up was people paid in for people that were drawing today. When the system was designed, there were 15 people paying in for every one person drawing. Today, there are 3 people paying in for every one person drawing. And by the end of this decade, there's 2 people paying in for every one person drawing. So there's just some basic math that suggests you can't have an aged population, which is where we're heading, and have the workers of that population be able to pay for a population that is almost half retired. So there's a financial reality that if we don't fix that debt, if we don't fix that liability for the country, our credit worthiness as a country becomes in jeopardy. We've already seen the first downgrade in America's history with our credit based on this impending debt crisis. And so there's the credit worthiness that's in question, and then, quite frankly, there's the inability to invest in other things. If you're having to spend money to prop up a bankrupt Social Security Medicare system, you don't have money then to deal with roads, bridges, education.
It's the crowding out, the same thing that we see with the pensions at the state level.
Exactly.
They keep absorbing more and more of the revenues, and then you don't have the money to go around for the actual services that government people think of government as being there for.
Right.
Law enforcement, roads, bridges, etc. I don't know to what extent, because I'm not running, people are grasping that the house is on fire financially and that we really need to do something. Whatever it is we're going to do, that's the essence of the negotiations on Capitol Hill, but we need to do something and do it quickly.
I think the focus that the House of Representatives has been leading the last 2 years on deficit reduction, the fight that we had over The debt limit deal, as painful as that was, it made everybody keenly aware that there is a debt problem. And the debate now we're having in this presidential election with Paul Ryan's proposal to fix these programs raises the awareness that we have a problem. Now, I'll be very blunt with you. When you ask somebody on the street what's the major issue you want dealt with, it's usually the economy, because it's the pain they're feeling today. Second to the economy in terms of having a job, it's the price at the pump. It's the cost of energy that's sucking more of their discretionary money out of the pot that they've got to work with. But beyond that, they know there's a debt problem. They know that these programs are going broke. Polls show that a majority of Americans know that Social Security and Medicare are insolvent, but it's human nature to wait till, to your point, till the last minute, and that's unfortunately will make the process more painful to fix. So a responsible person tries to head off the crisis before it occurs, and that's really what the House of Representatives has tried to do with bringing forward thoughtful proposals to fix Social Security and Medicare. My hope is after this political season is over, whoever is elected will join with the House of Representatives and offer their own proposals so we can negotiate some kind of a fix so that these programs don't become insolvent and jeopardize people's retirement security.
As we tape this, the Democratic Convention is going on. This will be shown afterwards. We're taping it on the day that President Obama will give his acceptance speech at the convention, so we can't really address what he says. But last night, we heard from former President Clinton. One of the things, you just mentioned that relative to the Republican proposal that we ought to lower rates, but then also get rid of some of the tax deductions. In his speech, President Clinton said, somewhat mockingly, the Republicans say that, but they don't even offer what it is that they would cut as a deduction. What deductions would they take away? What's your response to his comment?
Well, in some respects, he's correct, because we don't specify which of the deductions we have to get rid of, but both Republicans and Democrats that are on the Ways and Means Committee, that are on the Senate Finance Committee, these are the two committees that deal with tax policy, they know what the Christmas list of deductions are. And we know how many of them we have to get rid of to get down to 25%. Now, for example, in the business tax deductions, there's a debate right now whether we should get rid of R&D tax credits, whether we should get rid of the LIFO, last in, first out accounting method. Not to bore your listeners with all these details, right. But the point is that we know we have to get rid of, for example, 5 of the 6 major deductions for businesses. But we've had everyone from the CEO of Boeing and Caterpillar that says, look, we'll get rid of all of them if you can get us down to a 25% rate. So Sandy Levin, who's the ranking Democrat on the Ways and Means Committee, the top Democrat, has said, we like the proposal that Republicans have laid out. We just think the top rate will only get down to about 27%. Republicans have said, well, we think the top rate will get down to 25%. So even Democrats have said, we think we can get the rate down to 27%. They don't specify specifically which deductions they're going to get rid of, but both sides know there will be some pain in the process. But the fact that even the business community who benefits from a lot of these deductions has said, we'll take simplicity over even a lower rate. We'll take simplicity over even the case where some years we might pay lower than 25% with all of these deductions. We'd rather have the certainty to know it's going to be 25% today and 10 years from now. So he's right in the sense that you're not going to lay out too much specifics, because right now, until you've got a willing party to negotiate with you, look at what happens when we do lay out specifics on Social Security and Medicare. The president just launches a tax with no countervailing proposal, without any other plan of his own. And so we're not going to get into a lot of specificity on tax reform until we have a willing partner to negotiate which of those deductions will go away.
The other thing that's happening today, the markets are up dramatically, in part because there's some action relative to Europe on shoring up the European Central Bank President Draghi was making some comments that they're going to shore up the euro, which has been a major concern over the last year with these countries falling into heavier and heavier levels of debt. But the markets are up. They reached a 4.5-year high. There's some indication that maybe 200,000 jobs may be created again. I would imagine a spokesperson for the president would say this is an indication that we're moving in the right direction. Why would they be wrong if they are wrong?
Well, we have over 20 million Americans out of work. We have gone from a 10 trillion in debt to 16 trillion in debt. And the economy, in the minds of most Americans, has not gotten progressively better. We need to create over 300,000 jobs a month just to keep up with the number of college graduates coming out each year from our college institutions. We have over 3 million college graduates from last year. Over half of them are still unemployed or underemployed because of a lack of employment opportunities for them. So while 200,000 or 100,000 jobs may sound like a lot in terms of jobs created, the reality is you have 300,000 people on average per month entering the workforce. If you only create 100 or 200,000 jobs, you've not only not put all of them to work, all the new college graduates, you certainly have not put to work the people who've been unemployed.
When you were just talking about, so the Republican plan would be to lower the rates, get rid of some of the deductions. The Democratic response, again, President Clinton gave voice to this last night, says you're going to create a $5 trillion hole while you're complaining about President Obama's running up the debt. You're going to create $5 trillion by doing that.
That's not true. That's simply not true. In fact, the Congressional Budget Office has scored the proposal that we have in our budget as revenue neutral. Obviously, Paul Ryan's budget would not balance that we put forward. It would not bend the cost curve if we blew a hole in it to the tune of $5 trillion. If we put tax reform in place that didn't deal with getting rid of the loopholes and deductions. Certainly, if you take the top rate from 35% to 25%, yeah, you cost $5 trillion, but that's only half of the story, and that was disingenuous for President Clinton to make that claim yesterday. The fact of the matter is, our budget proposal has always been revenue neutral, and it's to the point I was making earlier, which is you can look at all the deductions, you can look at what they cost the federal treasury by having those deductions in place, and you can figure out very quickly which ones you have to get rid of in order to make that proposal of bringing the top rate from 35 down to 25 revenue neutral. And Republicans and Democrats have done this. The short story is you got to get rid of about 5 of the 6 big deductions for businesses, similarly for individuals, and you can do that. So again, I think what would be much more constructive for the president, both President Clinton and for President Obama, is rather than knock Republicans' proposals, they accept the fact that we need tax reform. They too decry the 70,000-page tax code. It's too complicated, it's too burdensome. Heck, Charlie Rangel, their own chairman of Ways and Means, couldn't pay his own taxes because he claimed it was too complicated. So we all agree with the problem. The real problem is we only have one party offering solutions. That's the frustrating thing for me as a Republican congressman. Look, I don't think my party is perfect. I don't think our proposals are perfect. But don't stand up and tell me that everything I've proposed is god-awful if you don't have a proposal of your own.
You don't get to talk to the president all the time, but on the other hand, you know him, you're both from Illinois. Have you ever had the opportunity to have a frank conversation, say, where's your plan?
We did. We actually had a private meeting with him at the White House about both our entitlement proposals and our tax proposals. His candid response to us was, I'm not going to put out a proposal because then you guys will just attack it. And Paul Ryan actually was in that meeting and went out and repeated that and said that's a failure of leadership.
Let's talk about Paul Ryan before time gets away from us entirely. There were a number of people that were discussed. I actually was somewhat surprised. I didn't think they'd want to take Paul Ryan out of the budget chair. What was your reaction when you heard he was the vice presidential nominee?
Well, knowing Paul as one of my best friends in Congress, I would say that I could not have been more proud of Governor Romney for choosing someone of substance, for choosing a very serious running mate, a very capable running mate, and someone who will allow Governor Romney, who has enormous private sector experience, enormous leadership and organizational experience, to have somebody who has the institutional knowledge of Congress, the institutional knowledge of the budget, to be able to marry those two together allows this team to hit the ground running come January of next year. That made me very excited for Governor Romney and for the ticket. Paul is someone who's not shy about taking on the tough challenges. And you know, what we need in Washington, D.C. more than people with plans is the ability to get those plans implemented. And what Paul has proven is an uncanny ability to work with some of the most conservative and liberal Republicans, as well as be able to cross the aisle and work with Democrats in the House and the Senate. His Medicare proposal, the Ryan Wyden proposal, is crafted with a Democrat senator from Oregon who worked with him to propose his Medicare plan. His budget that he's passed in the House of Representatives the last 2 years, that Paul Ryan budget passed with more votes than any budget that's passed Congress in the last 20 years. So the budgets that passed under Bill Clinton, the budgets that passed under George W. Bush, none of them got as many votes as the Paul Ryan budgets that have passed the last 2 years in the House of Representatives. That shows enormous leadership.
So knowing Ryan as you do in the relationships, were he to become the vice president, one, do you expect him not to just to be a figurehead vice president, but to actually be intricately involved in these economic issues? And two, given his relationships, would he be an effective person to be working with representing the White House in Congress?
Yes to both of those. First, I don't have to wonder whether he would be effective working with Congress because he has been effective working in Congress. I don't have to wonder whether he can build the support within the Republican Party. He's done that, been able to pass his budgets. I don't have to worry whether he has credibility with Democrats or whether he can work with people. He's done that. And I don't have to worry about whether he'll be just a figurehead. I mean, this guy has been one of the most active legislators, and I think Mitt chose him for that reason. Governor Romney chose him for that reason. He didn't just choose somebody who was a pretty face or was from a particular state or would help him with some demographic. He picked Paul Ryan because he's a serious legislator and Mitt Romney wants to fix things. And Paul's not going to be somebody who's going to be the vice president just for the perks. He wants to be vice president because he actually wants to fix this stuff.
Before we close out, now let's, for the sake of discussion, were Romney to be elected and Paul Ryan became vice president, then that obviously opens up the Budget Committee chairmanship. What would you be interested in that job? I know you're on Ways and Means now, but with your interest in the economic issues and working on them as you have, what changes, if any, within Congress, presuming you're reelected, would you like to go after where the opportunity is available?
Well, I'm already on the best committee in Congress.
You are.
So the Ways and Means Committee.
For those who don't know, you are on the best committee.
Historically, it's the best committee. So I'm not going to be able to get on many more committees. The Budget Committee is the one committee you can serve on, and also serve on the Ways and Means Committee. The other ones are what they call select committees. So that's the Intelligence Committee, the Ethics Committee, and the House Administration Committee. The Speaker of the House makes those appointments, and he has appointed me to the House Administration Committee. So I serve right now in the House Administration Committee and the Ways and Means Committee. I do have an interest in the Budget Committee. I think if you talk to Congressman Ryan, he would tell you I've been helpful in terms of reaching out to members of Congress and helping to sell his plan. I don't think you have to be on the committee to be a part of the budget process.
Right.
I was very involved with the transportation bill, for example, even though I'm not on transportation committee anymore. So I'm not sure if I'll gain additional positions, but what I hope with a Governor Romney as a President Romney and Paul Ryan as Vice President, if that happens, is that my relationship with those two men, having campaigned with Governor Romney early on in Iowa, having the close relationship I do with Paul Ryan, serving on the committee with him currently, I hope to be able to get more done as a legislator for our country, and then certainly for the 18th Congressional District. It doesn't hurt to have an in with the President and Vice President to look out for my constituents.
We'll close out at this, if there is a President Romney and a Paul Ryan, and it may be an unfair question, but I presume you've probably talked privately with Paul Ryan about this. Knowing the nature of the crisis, the economic crisis that confronts us, how quickly would you imagine a Romney administration would go to work on addressing these major issues, the entitlement reforms that are needed?
I think we'd see it in the first, I would hope we'd see action in the first year. I would think there's going to be major proposals laid out in the first 100 days. I think there will be a push. Certainly the House of Representatives staying in Republican hands would ensure that the budget that has passed already the last 2 years would be ready to roll, would be ready to be enacted in the House of Representatives again for the 3rd year. This time, however, if we won the 4 seats we needed in the Senate, we'd actually be able to pass a budget in the Senate. The budget is the one of the few things in the Senate you don't need 60 votes for. You'll hear Democrats decry right now the process in the Senate because they need 60 votes for everything, and those Republicans won't cooperate with them in the Senate. Well, not so with the budget. The budget, you only need 51 votes to pass a budget, and if you have 51 votes, you can bring the budget to the floor and pass it. So with a simple 51 vote majority, we can pass a budget in the Senate. We've already passed one in the House the last 2 years, and then you have the framework for deficit reduction. You have the framework for how you're going to cut spending, and that's something that would come forward, I think, in the first 100 days of a Romney-Ryan administration. Then you get into the bigger problems, which are Medicare and Social Security, and I think you work off of the proposals that Paul Ryan has put forward. They're not going to be perfect. Governor Romney's already said he would make some changes to them. But again, it's a roadmap, it's a plan, and depending on the makeup of the Senate, we'd have to negotiate with the Senate. But again, I think you would see action in the first year on entitlement reform, on the budget, certainly tax reform. Paul knows a lot about from being on the Ways and Means Committee, and certainly Governor Romney has paid his fair share of taxes and understands from the businessman's perspective the importance of competitiveness for our country.
Let's just get 2 quick answers now. We'll close out. One, what rate of growth do you think we need to see in the economy for us to be able to meet the challenge? And secondly, not as a Republican, but as a political observer, how would you rate the odds of the Republican Party capturing the Senate in this fall election?
So the rate of growth, obviously the faster the economy grows, the less cuts you have to make to balance the budget. Paul's budget that we passed assumes a rate of growth of 4%, which I think is realistic. If we turn the stagnant economy around, 4% is reasonable. We had more than 4% growth during the 90s when the economy was roaring. So I think a 4% rate of growth is something that's achievable and puts us on that path towards balance. Obviously, if we get a 5 or 6% rate of growth for a few years, that
and we did that under President Reagan coming
Sure.
out of that recession in the early 80s.
Sure. So, you know, I'd love to say higher, but 4% is achievable, realistic, and if we obtain 4%, we are on the path that we need to be to pay off the debt.
And for those that don't follow, we're maybe doing about 1% or
Yes.
so now.
1.2 to 1.9 has been, I think, the swing in the last couple of years. So below 2%, below half of what we need.
Right.
Your second question was?
Will the Republicans take the Senate? Obviously, the Senate has not been taking up the Republican bills. Government, for better or for worse, people might like divided government, but then often things don't get done.
Well, we need 4 seats, and I would say a year ago, most people expected us to get those 4 seats, or at least had a very good shot at getting those 4 seats. I think a lot of it depends on the presidential race. If we have a very close presidential race up until the end of the race in November, then we have a very good shot of winning those 4 seats, because there are a lot of good Republican candidates for the United States Senate in states that Romney is going to win, and win handily. Now, some of those candidates, Todd Akin in Missouri, for example, has come into some challenges. However, my understanding is the recent polls show that race tightening and more neck and neck. You have states in Montana, for example, where there's a strong Republican congressman running for the U.S. Senate, Denny Rehberg, who's ahead in the polls right now. Mitt Romney will win Montana handily and may carry with it that U.S. Senate seat. States like Florida, where you have Ben Nelson up with Connie Mack, another popular congressman there, that race is neck and neck. If Romney wins Florida, there's a good chance Connie Mack comes to the U.S. Senate. So getting to those 4 seats is very achievable that we need. It's not certain, but I think there's an above 50% chance that Republicans will win the U.S. Senate. If Mitt Romney is elected president, I would say, I'm careful to say anything for sure, but I would say with almost certainty, if Governor Romney is elected president, we will win the 4 seats we need for control of the Senate as well.
All right, well, Congressman Aaron Schock, I know you're busy, but we appreciate you taking the time to talk with us.
Thanks, Terry. Always good to be with you.
You're watching the Illinois Channel, an independent nonprofit corporation formed to provide gavel-to-gavel coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois.